April 16, 2007. Virginia Tech University. A campus alive with a morning shuffle of students heading to class. The air was brisk, spring winds cutting across the courtyard, and in dorm rooms, the smell of rushed breakfast still lingered. It was supposed to be just another Monday, but within minutes, the heart of this quiet academic community would descend into a nightmare that America had never seen before. First came the shouts, muffled at first, then desperate. Doors slammed. Phones buzzed uncontrollably. And then, the echo of gunfire. Students hid under desks, some barricading themselves with furniture, others sending frantic texts to loved ones. There's a shooter. I don't know if I'll make it. By the time the gunfire stopped, 32 innocent lives were lost. Professors, athletes, aspiring engineers, international scholars. Their futures erased in the blink of an eye. It was and remains the deadliest campus shooting in United States history. But behind those horrific numbers was a story of warning signs missed, cries for help ignored, and a system unprepared for the storm that was coming. To understand the terror of that day, we have to look at the man who carried it out, Seung-Hui Cho. Born in South Korea in 1984, Cho's early years gave little hint of the darkness that would later consume him. His family immigrated to the United States when he was just 8 years old, settling in Virginia in search of a better life. As Cho grew older, his isolation deepened. He rarely made eye contact, seldom joined group conversations, and often drifted into a world of his own thoughts. In high school, classmates bullied him for his quietness and odd mannerisms. One professor was so unsettled that she approached campus authorities, warning them that Cho could pose a danger to himself or others. But each time, the warnings were filed away, noted but not acted upon. Mental health professionals at the university assessed Cho and found signs of severe depression and anxiety. He was prescribed medication and even temporarily hospitalized after being deemed a risk to himself. Yet once released, the follow-up care was minimal, and Cho quickly slipped through the cracks of a system not designed to handle long-term intervention. Virginia Tech in 2007 was a bustling hub of academic and social life. Located in Blacksburg, Virginia, it was home to over 25,000 students, many of whom came from small towns across the state. The campus was large, with sprawling green quads, lecture halls, and dormitories filled with the sounds of youth and ambition. For most students, that spring semester was filled with typical college worries: exams, relationships, internships, and dreams for the future. Few could have imagined that one of their peers, a fellow student they had likely passed by in the cafeteria or sat near in class, was harboring a storm of violence that would soon engulf them all. Cho himself was a senior English major, but unlike most of his classmates, his college experience was not marked by camaraderie or personal growth. He lived in isolation, speaking to virtually no one, his presence described as ghostly. Some students recalled him wearing sunglasses indoors, keeping his head down and never uttering a word, even when called upon in class. Behind closed doors, however, Cho's anger and resentment festered. He became obsessed with the idea that he was a victim of society's cruelty, rejected by women, ignored by peers, and belittled by a world he believed had conspired against him. He poured these grievances into videos and manifestos, railing against rich kids and debauchery he believed surrounded him. It was this toxic cocktail of isolation, untreated mental illness, and festering resentment that would soon erupt into tragedy. On the evening of April 15th, 2007, the day before the massacre, Cho was methodically preparing for what he believed would be his final act. He purchased chains to lock the doors of Norris Hall, the academic building that would become ground zero for the second phase of his attack. He tested his handguns, two semi-automatic pistols, a Glock 19 and a Walther P22, both of which he had legally purchased despite his troubling mental health history. Cho also assembled his so-called manifesto, a collection of writings, photos, and video recordings in which he explained his motives and compared himself to other mass killers. He believed he was striking back at a world that had wronged him, casting himself as an avenger rather than a murderer. And then, in the quiet of that Sunday night, while his classmates were studying, partying, or sleeping, Seung-Hui Cho steeled himself for the horror he was about to unleash. Monday morning began like any other at Virginia Tech. The sun rose over Blacksburg, students grabbed their backpacks, and dormitories stirred with sleepy undergraduates preparing for class. But within hours, those same halls would echo with screams, sirens, and gunfire. The stage was set. It was around 7:15 a.m. on Monday, April 16, 2007, when the first shots rang out inside West Ambler Johnston Hall, a co-ed dormitory on the Virginia Tech campus. The building, home to hundreds of students, was just beginning to stir. Some were in the showers, others grabbing a quick breakfast, and many still asleep. Inside, Cho Seung-Hui had made his first move. Armed with his semi-automatic pistols, he shot Emily Hilscher, a freshman, and Ryan Stack Clark, a resident advisor who had rushed to help when he heard screams. Emily, just 18, was a beloved animal lover studying biology. Ryan, 22, was known for his warmth and kindness. He tried to save her, but instead became one of Cho's first victims. The shooting was reported quickly. Campus police arrived within minutes, discovering two bodies and a bloody crime scene. But in those early moments, investigators believed it might be a domestic dispute, possibly involving Emily's boyfriend. They did not yet realize that this was only the beginning. After killing Emily and Ryan, Cho slipped away unnoticed. What followed remains one of the most haunting aspects of the tragedy, a 2-hour window of uncertainty. During this time, while investigators interviewed Emily's boyfriend and considered the dorm incident isolated, Cho was preparing for something far deadlier. He returned to his dorm room, changed his clothes, and packed up chains and locks he had purchased in advance. Most chillingly, he mailed a package to NBC News containing his rambling manifesto, photos of himself holding weapons, and videos ranting against the world. At 9:01 a.m., he left the Blacksburg post office. By 9:30, he was back on campus, heading toward Norris Hall. Norris Hall, an academic building, was busy with morning classes. Students filled engineering, German, and French lectures. Professors prepared their lesson plans. At 9:40 a.m., Cho arrived at the entrance. Carrying his pistols and chains, he locked the building's main doors from the inside, ensuring that once the shooting began, there would be no escape. And then, he started moving down the hallways. Cho entered classrooms methodically, one after another, firing indiscriminately at students and professors. In room 206, German professor Jamie Bishop was teaching when Cho burst in. Bishop was shot and killed almost instantly. Several of his students were hit as they tried to hide or run. In room 207, Cho attacked a French class. Professor Jocelyn Kuter-Nowak urged students to hide, but she too was gunned down. In room 211, engineering students tried to take cover under desks, but Cho fired into them relentlessly. In room 204, Professor Liviu Librescu, a 76-year-old Holocaust survivor, held the classroom door shut while students escaped through the windows. He sacrificed himself, shot multiple times, but saved nearly every student in his class. Survivors later described the terror, the deafening sound of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder, and the chaos as classmates fell beside them. Some pretended to be dead, lying motionless in pools of blood, hoping Cho would pass them by. Others tried to call 911, whispering into their phones while muffling sobs. At 9:42 a.m., the first 911 calls flooded in from Norris Hall. Police raced to the scene, but found the doors chained shut. Cho had anticipated their arrival. It took precious minutes for officers to break the locks and force their way inside. By then, the shooting had already gone on for nearly 10 minutes. Students and professors continued to fall victim as Cho moved from classroom to classroom. In those frantic moments, 32 lives were taken, the worst massacre of its kind in U.S. history. At 9:50 a.m., police breached the building. Hearing them closing in, Cho turned one of his pistols on himself and pulled the trigger. The shooting was over, but the devastation left behind was unimaginable. Bodies lay sprawled across classrooms and hallways. Survivors wept, some in shock, others bleeding from gunshot wounds. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of sirens and desperate cries. The stories of those who lived paint a harrowing picture. Colin Goddard, a senior, was shot 4 times but survived by playing dead until police arrived. He would later dedicate his life to gun control advocacy. Christina Anderson, another survivor, was shot 3 times but lived after pretending to be lifeless. She went on to found a nonprofit for survivors of mass violence. Multiple students describe how Professor Librescu's bravery gave them the seconds needed to escape through windows, his sacrifice remembered as one of the most heroic acts of the day. Each account was a reminder that while Cho's violence was overwhelming, acts of courage shone through the darkness. By the end of the morning, 33 people were dead, 32 victims, and the shooter. Another 17 were injured. The victims came from all walks of life: young undergraduates, graduate students, and professors. Some were American-born, others international students from places like India, Peru, and Indonesia. All had come to Virginia Tech with dreams of careers, families, futures that were cut short. The massacre was not only the deadliest campus shooting in U.S. history, but also one of the most devastating acts of mass violence the country had ever faced. As word spread, the media swarmed Blacksburg. Parents rushed to the campus, desperate for word of their children. Hospitals filled with survivors, while makeshift morgues were set up for the victims. The world watched in shock as the death toll climbed. For many, the thought was unthinkable. How could this happen on a college campus? By late morning on April 16, 2007, Virginia Tech was a scene of chaos and heartbreak. Police had secured Norris Hall, students were being evacuated, and medical teams worked frantically to treat the wounded. But for many families, the day's agony was just beginning. Parents arrived on campus desperately searching for answers. Some had received frantic text messages from their children hours earlier. "There's a shooter. I'm scared," followed by silence. Others hadn't heard a word. At Castle Coliseum, the basketball arena, officials began the agonizing process of notifying families. Rows of parents waited, clutching photographs and whispering prayers. Some were told their children were safe. Others were led into side rooms, where the truth shattered their lives forever.